The first time I saw him, he had this magnetic charisma that you could feel across the gym. And you just thought, hey man, this guy's a star.
And I'll do whatever it takes to look adversity in the face and spit in its eye.
The wrestling world could never have imagined that an undersized football player from Cincinnati would revolutionize the business, ushering in a whole new era.
Shut the hell up!
Brian knew what the deal was, that they're going to screw him over, they're going to screw anybody over, and how he could make that play for his own advantage.
In an industry that depends on the illusion of reality, no one did more to blur the lines than Brian Pillman, who shattered wrestling's fourth wall.
He was going against the script. This has never been done before.
What are you doing? Easy!
Pillman's over-the-top antics exposed the inner workings of the business, leveraging trade secrets to make the deal of a lifetime.
That loose cannon gimmick, he just took it so far.
A lot of people thought, oh man, it was too extreme.
You didn't know where Brian started and his wrestling persona ended.
Get him the hell out of here!
He had a lot of troublesome relationships with women.
My mom had had enough, and that kind of pushed her over the edge a little bit.
He's being driven crazy at home. He's supposed to be crazy at work, and in between, he's probably really going crazy.
On track to become a wrestling superstar at the price of his own sanity, his rise to the top was tragically cut short.
I'm watching the pre-show for the pay-per-view.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some tragic news to report.
I just screamed.
He had a persona that he wanted to perpetuate, even if it killed him.
Man, this is the gold chain that Brian Pillman got for me way back in the day. And I'll never forget, we were riding down the road one day, and he goes, kid, we gotta have gold chains. He goes, they'll look great. And all these years later, I don't have a lot of things, you know, from my old wrestling days, but this chain is something that I'll always have. It's very sentimental to me, and it was a big part of the makeup and the gimmick of the Hollywood Blondes. I'm Steve Austin, a friend of Brian's from way back in our WCW days, and we were tag team partners. Turned out to be really good friends and a pretty damn good tag team.
The Hollywood Blondes!
Brian didn't phone nothing in. He wanted to go out there and perform. The guy that was never supposed to be big enough or bad enough or strong enough to do anything. He blew everybody away with his tenacity and his will to win. He was a good-looking guy, great physique, high flyer, could do everything.
Brian was very athletic. Really seemed like he was willing to try anything, and you could tell that he really wanted to be a pro wrestling star. I'm Jim Ross, and when I was in WCW in the mid-'80s, Brian was a guy that we had very high hopes for and really wanted to sign.
Because after we're done pounding you in submission, the only thing that's going to be prescribed for you guys afterwards is a liquid diet of embalming fluid.
Brian, from the time he first got in the ring, you could tell he was a performer. He was an exhibitionist. He wanted you to notice him. He had the personality for wrestling. I'm Jim Cornette. I've been involved in professional wrestling for over 40 years as a manager, promoter, announcer, matchmaker, and I was good friends in the 80s and 90s with Brian Pillman.
Submit.
He wasn't trying to just be the move guy. He wasn't just trying to be the guy with the nice mullet and the abs. Like, he was trying to be everything. He was trying to hit this business on all fronts and fire on all cylinders, and he was trying to be the biggest star that the business had ever seen. My name is Brian Pillman Jr. I am the only son of the late, great Brian Pillman, otherwise known as the Loose Cannon.
Brian was a natural promo. When they stuck a mic in front of him, he would just go off in that raspy voice.
You're not running this interview. I am, because I'm Brian Pillman.
Growing up, Brian had multiple polyps on his vocal cords, and it was closing up his air passage. They'd scrape them off, and then after so long, they'd grow right back again. And that's why his voice was so raspy, because his vocal cords had been scraped so many times. I'm Linda, Brian's older sister. You know, he had over 40 surgeries. I don't know the exact number. When my mother came in from work one day, she could hear breathing as soon as she came in the house, and it was closing up his air passage. And she called the doctor. She had to hold the receiver up so he could hear him breathing, and that's when he decided he needed emergency tracheotomy. He told my mother to have the ambulance bring them to his house, because his house was closer than the hospital. And he put a tracheotomy in Brian on his dining room table in the middle of the night. But it never stopped him from doing anything. He was always outside playing and running, and he wasn't allowed to talk for like 2 or 3 weeks after those surgeries, and he didn't talk.
As a result of that, I think he overcompensated later on by wanting to always talk and wanting to be an entertainer. It formed him as the guy that was going to overcome, overachieve, knock down the obstacles, whatever the case may be.
The son of a bitch was fearless. I mean, he's a tough nut. My name is Kim Wood. I was the Paul Brown strength coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, and Pillman get a chance to try out with us. My instruction was to kill him. And not literally kill him, but damn close. But he tried his ass off.
You know, he always said it's not about the size of the dog in the fight, it's about the size of the fight and the dog.
He had a reputation in Cincinnati being a street fighter.
I heard that he was at some bar that had an upper floor, like a balcony or whatever you want to call it. And he was up there and some girl threw a drink in his face. And her boyfriend came after Brian. Before it was over, the guy was hanging. Brian had him hanging by his ankles over the railing, over the first floor. And Brian was banned from that bar.
After a brief stint in the NFL, Brian heads to Calgary to play in the Canadian Football League. Soon after, Brian suffers an ankle injury, cutting his career short, which leaves him searching for what to do next.
One thing I knew about Brian was that he wasn't going to be a high school teacher. He wasn't going to sell insurance. There was a lot of things he wasn't going to do, where he could use his toughness and his physicality to make money.
Well, a couple years ago when I was with the Bengals, Kim Wood, the strength coach, he had talked to me about getting into professional wrestling. He thought I had all the tools needed to be successful. And it turns out Calgary happens to be the premier training ground for wrestlers in the world.
And I said, hey, while you're up there, go check out this Hart bunch.
The Harts are the first family of Canadian wrestling, with patriarch Stu Hart at the helm. In addition to his children that would go on to be wrestling icons, the family also discovered and trained several other future superstars.
They take them into the Hart dungeon and they teach them how to wrestle in one of the most prestigious ways to break into the business that there is.
How would you sort of describe what the dungeon is to someone who doesn't know what it is?
Well, from what I hear, if you can't hear screaming coming out of it, something's not going right.
Stu, the old man, would put people in submission holes and then not let them out of the thing for, 3 or 4 hours. If you could survive that, you could survive almost anything.
So you get that great foundation all right off the bat from Stu. It was an easy bridge to cross from football to wrestling.
Brian gets his start in Stampede Wrestling, and although it's a small territory in Western Canada, its influence on the industry is felt around the wrestling world.
In the 80s, there were millions of wrestling fans, but there was a small subset called smart fans that knew the inside inner workings of wrestling.
The insiders all knew the name Brian Pillman pretty quick. I'm Dave Meltzer, editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. It's an insider publication that's covered pro wrestling since 1982. For a long time, it was like really the only, what I would call true source of pro wrestling information that was out there.
The sheets were kind of a thing back in the day. You didn't really want to get caught with them. It's kind of like the secret documents. And then it kind of got out that damn near all the boys are reading.
I mean, with Brian, he had started wrestling when he called me the first time. And he wanted to send me tapes and wanted me to send tapes, so we traded tapes. As far as studying the game, I mean, top level more than almost anyone that I've ever dealt with.
Meltzer was a good gauge for talent. So that tipped me off that Meltzer kept writing good things about Brian. Brian wound up in WCW by me getting a hold of you.
All right, Brian, best of luck on that endeavor, ladies.
Upon arriving in WCW, top star and matchmaker Ric Flair sees something in Brian and looks to feature him on television in a main event spot.
And we put that match together, and it was one of the highest rated Saturday night television programs on TBS at that point in the previous several years. And the crowd popped for it.
Crowd chanting, go, Brian, go.
Ric Flair was the kind of guy that wanted to go in the ring with somebody like Brian and go 30 or 45 minutes and tear the house down, and then he wanted to go to the bar with Brian or somebody like Brian for 5 or 6 hours and tear the house down there.
That's the way he lived. He lived a cartoon life, a fantasy life of limos and long black socks and alligator shoes and, you know, babes.
I think Brian liked aspects of the lifestyle a lot. You know, he wanted to be like Ric Flair.
Brian Pillman was a ladies' man. I mean, he's a gorgeous guy. He's on television. He's a professional athlete. So, yeah, a lot of the women were attracted to Brian.
Rochelle was a woman that Brian met at a club downtown Cincinnati. You know, they were happy, and we all loved her. She went and lived with him in Calgary for a while before he got the contract down in Atlanta. And that's when Brittany was born in Atlanta.
My name is Brittany Pillman. I'm the daughter of Brian Pillman. I was a daddy's girl. You know, everyone sees him as this wrestler and always on the road, and, you know, wrestling was his life, but outside of wrestling, his children were his life. My dad thought I was his firstborn child. When I was a year old, he found out that he had another daughter out there that was 2 years old.
I'm Danielle Pillman. I go by Danny, and Brian Pillman is my father, and I am the oldest of his kids. My dad met my mom at the waterfront in Cincinnati, like some bar. And I mean, it was like a very brief love affair. But she did end up becoming pregnant, that my dad had Rochelle as his girlfriend at the time. So yeah, that's kind of why she didn't want to disclose that to my father immediately. But at a certain point, she felt like, you know, I needed my dad. And the second that I came into the picture, he was there for me 100% and wanted me to be in every part of his life. And I think that's something to be said about him, is that he really did care about his kids.
You know, my dad living that lifestyle and all these different women, and, you know, he had obviously cheated on my mom many times. I'm sure that was hard on her, but she stayed with him, you know. She had a lot of issues. She suffered with major depression. There was a time my mom and dad were living in Atlanta, and my dad was at a show.
The groundskeeper broke into the place and attacked her with an ice pick.
And she was stabbed several times.
Was he trying to rob her? Or?
Rob her, whatever, I don't know. Stabbed her in the face. Stabbed her in the cheek. So that'll mess you up.
Brian Pillman's good looks and athletic ability allow him a spot on the card as a generic hero. But he's not content to stay in one place for long, nor do what he's told.
He was reasonably successful. But, you know, he wanted to be a main eventer, and he wasn't a main eventer yet. He was a good mid-level guy.
You know, Brian's first couple years in WCW were tough. I'm Eric Bischoff, former president of WCW, and once upon a time, Brian Pillman's boss. Brian wasn't relatively new on the scene his first couple years in WCW, so he had to earn his respect. What probably made that even tougher was the amount of management transitions that took place.
Constant changeover in management led to stop-and-start pushes in Brian's career. As soon as he started to gain ground and earn respect, new matchmakers would arrive, pushing Brian back down to the bottom.
But finally, they put Brian together with Steve Austin.
He's ready to back you up 100%.
All right, stunning Steve Austin.
And I wasn't thrilled at all.
When people hear the name Steve Austin, they think he was always the biggest star in wrestling. At the time in 1993, he was still finding his way, hadn't got a main event spot yet.
And this is about when I'm fixing to start getting a run as a United States champion. So I was really looking forward to that. I walk in the building, and here's Brian coming up behind me, and I knew Brian, but we weren't hanging out. He goes, "Hey, kid, we need to come up with a finish." And I said, "What the F are you talking about?" He goes, "We're tag team now." And I was really not happy. I had nothing against Brian, but it's like I was a singles wrestler. I enjoyed working with another guy in the ring and only having to depend on myself. And they didn't have no name planned for us, no this, no that. It was two singles guys, and they were gonna throw us together as an interim tag team, basically to get other people over because they didn't have plans for Brian and they didn't have plans for Steve Austin. So, and we were gonna try to make the most of the situation. Anytime that you start working together and traveling with someone, you become closer. And normally I'd be at the wheel. Brian would be riding shotgun, reading dictionaries, because he was always trying to increase his vocabulary for promos.
And began the pilgrimage out to Florida to cut through the bureaucratic red tape and get that title shot.
So as it goes, we're going down the road, and he goes, "Hey kid, every tag team has to have a name. So what about the Hollywood Blondes?" He goes, "It's been done before, but it's been a while, so let's do that." And I was thinking to myself, well, I ain't come up with a better one. And so, like, I was cool with being the Hollywood Blondes.
Jesse, guess what?
The vest, the trunks, everything was Brian's idea. And we were two cocky, brash, arrogant guys. Then we started rolling the camera footage and stuff like that. You know, Brian, he had that shit-eating grin or that laugh, you know, when you're getting heat on a baby face. And Brian and I developed this bond and this chemistry. I loved tag team wrestling once I figured it out.
I hate to say it this way because it sounds really corny, but they were made for each other because they complemented each other so well. They worked hard to make each other look good.
The Hollywood Blondes also gave Brian a chance to open up as a heel, as a bad guy.
People nowadays are like, "Oh, I love the Hollywood Blondes." But if you go back then, they were getting booed out the building. And you love to hate it.
I think it was more natural for Brian to be a heel because, you know, he wasn't a guy that wanted to shake hands and kiss babies and smile. He wanted to be a smart ass. He wanted to be obnoxious. He wanted to show off.
Together, and I'll tell you another great match.
He was getting better at what he does, getting global exposure, partying, having fun.
Brian's fast and loose lifestyle doesn't mix well with his turbulent situation at home, and he pursues yet another woman who enters his already complicated life.
I think Melanie was working in Atlanta. She was a showgirl.
He saw her picture in a penthouse or something and says, "I'm going to marry that girl," and somewhere along the line he met her.
My dad was sleeping with Melanie behind my mother's back because he was always in Atlanta.
Melanie would call the house, and that's basically, I think, how Rochelle found out about it. You know, she was hurt because, you know, they had a nice home, the family was happy, but then he had this other life in Atlanta, and then Melanie became pregnant, and that's how we had Brian Jr.
After another unexpected pregnancy outside of their relationship, Brian and Rochelle split up. Shortly after, Brian proposes to his new girlfriend, Melanie.
We went to Vegas, and he put on like a freaking St. Patrick's Day white tux with a big old ugly green bow tie. And I had a white dress, mind you. The stripper in a white dress, yeah. And I had a big old green corsage on. And I loved it, every second of it. I wouldn't trade it for the world. My name is Melanie Pillman. I'm the widow of Brian Pillman. In private, like, he's just more laid back and sensible acting. But he's one of the most intelligent men I've ever met in my life. Like, so well-read, and he just excelled at so many things. He was my soulmate. I mean, I couldn't have picked a better guy to love than him.
His first years with her, I thought he was very happy. It'd be a big thing with his Christmas card, because it would be him and the wife and all these little kids.
Because I had my two kids, you know.
He would show up with like 3 or 4 little kids. They all had different mothers. They'd be climbing around him. He'd be carrying a couple, and one had his legs around his neck, and one was on the shoulder, and he loved those kids.
He was counted on, he was depended on to provide. That responsibility is what pushes you to keep going to work. He have to provide for your family.
Stunning Steve and Flying Brian.
And finally, they made the decision to give the Hollywood Blondes a big main event match. It was going to be on a Clash of Champions, and Ric Flair was returning. He was going to be involved. And the rating came in, and it wasn't very good. And they couldn't blame Flair because he was a big star, so they put the heat on Brian Pillman and Steve Austin. Well, the Hollywood Blondes didn't draw a rating. And that kind of doomed them there as being featured in a more prominent capacity going forward.
Felt like betrayal. I wish someone would finally tell me why the company decided to break us up, because we started getting over as a viable tag team that could hold, world championship belts. We did. We make chicken shit into chicken salad, and now you want to split us up with no real clear direction for either one of us. So breaking us up broke my heart.
I don't know of any other talents that had been buried because they drew a bad rating. At the time, TBS was drawing a lot of bad ratings. But I think there was probably somebody that just thought, I don't want to use these guys, and they used that as an excuse.
How that was handled, I look back on it today and still shake my head that we could have done better.
I would say the period from 1990 to 1993, it was very frustrating for Brian. Also, there was some knowledge early on that his home life was not as happy as it could be.
I felt like my dad allowed Melanie to run the show. Melanie treated my mom very poorly. I feel like she was very jealous of my mother.
Melanie didn't like him talking to her. She didn't like me and my mother talking to Rochelle. She made it hard to like her because she just caused trouble. And then Rochelle took off and didn't tell anybody where she was.
Rochelle is scheduled to see Brittany for a visit, but she never shows. No one is able to get a hold of her, resulting in a missing persons report. Several days later, when Rochelle finally surfaces, Brian and Melanie take decisive action.
And Brian said, and I agreed with him, and I shouldn't have, we should just file for custody. And that changed everything.
Following the tag team breakup with Steve Austin, Brian's career has stalled, and the cracks in his family life start to break open, consuming those around him.
The custody battle started because Melanie didn't want Rochelle around. Basically, Brian had more money and could keep the attorneys paid because the attorneys only work when you pay them. And Rochelle just didn't have any more money.
I was, delivering stuff to the lawyer. I was bombarding her with these stupid things about returning past child support that she blew in Florida. Just little minutia that was making me feel like a better person, but really, in reality, I wasn't the better person. Nobody should try to take kids away from a mother. I should have never done that. In a million years, I would never do it again.
It just devastated Rochelle.
I was outside riding my bicycle one day, and this was at a time when she wasn't allowed to see me. And she came pulling up, and I just went running to her, and I was so happy to see her.
Rochelle was hugging her, and they thought she was taking her.
And here comes my dad, and it was just like this huge argument, and him pulling her away from me.
Melanie filed kidnapping charges against Rochelle.
And so my dad had got full custody of me, and in my mom's mind, she was just like, I'm gonna lose my daughter and I'm never gonna see her again. And so my mom called my dad's house, and she wanted to talk to my dad, but he was out of town. Melanie had answered, and Melanie told her, she said, even your own mother thinks I would be a better mother for your daughter than you'll ever be. And my mom called my grandma.
She called her mother and told her mother what she was going to do. And then she shot herself. Because I got the call to go to the hospital because she was being airlifted, and I was the closest. And I was the one at the hospital that they told, and then I had to tell everybody that she was gone. She died on the helicopter. So I had to call her mother and tell her mother. Oh, it was very hard to tell somebody's mother that their child was dead.
It just destroyed Brian because he felt so responsible. I mean, he just was so upset. He cried and he cried. And he said, "Do you think it was all that pressure we put on her?" I think it was, Mel. I'd be like, yeah, it probably was. So Brian, he wanted to pay for her whole funeral and everything.
And at the funeral, he held it together until they closed the casket. And he lost it. He was hugging me and sobbing. And in fact, at one point, I kind of looked at him because I thought he was going to pass out. He was devastated. He was devastated.
I felt so guilty for that for years. And I think I drove her, maybe not just me, but I think incidents drove her to shoot herself. Rethinking it, I wouldn't have done it the same way. Nobody should have to fight for their kid. I mean, it wasn't like she was abusing her, so I don't really know what my problem was back then. It was devastating. And I know it was for Brittany.
I have a lot of anger built up towards my dad in a sense because I do wish that he would have, you know, allowed my mom to at least see me because maybe she would still be here today. I don't know. She had a lot of issues, but Melanie was the overall cause. She's an evil person and she's always been that way. Melanie should have never said those words to my mom. She's literally the devil, and they say, you know, you reap what you sow. And now she's living a life that she should have already been dead years ago because of all the drugs that she's done. But I feel like she's gonna live to be 100 years old and absolutely miserable for all the pain and suffering that she has caused me and my brother and, you know, my Aunt Linda.
And Brittany's the one that, you know, I don't know how to make it up to her. There's nothing, I don't really know how to make it up to her. I wish I could.
The guilt of Rochelle's death weighs heavily on Brian, and he dives even deeper into his career. With his contract renewal with the WCW looming, Brian is determined to renegotiate for even more money.
When we talk business, it's like, I have 5 kids. I don't know how many more years I can do this because my body's falling apart. I have to make big money now because I've got 5 kids.
This was his shot. He talks with Bischoff, that was evidently doing the contracts there. And Bischoff says to him, expect about what you're getting now.
He was pretty happy that I got him back to 225, but I think he wanted 4 is the number that he was really wanting. I couldn't give it to him. I couldn't justify it at the time that he wanted it.
He came to me and he says, what do I do? And what I told him was this. It's a question of value. When everybody's using everybody else, what can you do that other people can't do? What can you do that gains notoriety? This thing runs on attention. It runs on very superficial things. We got to create attention. How can we do that in the position you're in?
With his pulse on the wrestling landscape, Brian knew that he had to find a way to up the ante in order to shock even the most hardcore of fans.
Brian knew if he could make people legitimately believe that he was a loose cannon, that he was nuts, he was off his rocker, he was capable of doing anything or saying anything at any time, that he could be one of the hottest guys in the wrestling industry.
It was a pure money deal. What do we really want? Bischoff to offer you a hell of a lot more money, and we want Vince McMahon to see that you are of value and offer you more. And then you flip a coin.
If he could play one side against the other in the middle of the burgeoning wrestling war, then he would come out much better, 6 figures per year better. And that's what he set about to do.
Brian Pillman's plan was simple. More attention means more money. As the WWF and WCW are engaged in a ratings battle, Brian exploits this to his advantage by playing them off each other while driving up his own value.
Brian came up with the loose cannon idea and started slowly integrating it into his television appearances. Bobby Heenan was the color commentator. Bobby had had a broken neck, and he'd had surgery, and he was very protective of his neck. And Brian goes around behind Bobby and starts grabbing him by the shoulders and everything. And on live television, Bobby says, "What the are you doing? Easy." And then Brian knew he got it. He got gold out of it, right? Because now everybody's going to be talking about the F-bomb that got dropped on Turner Broadcasting. Bobby thought Brian was nuts.
I think the brain is left.
It seemed real to the point where people were confused whether it was real or not.
One of the guys he was involved with was Kevin Sullivan, who was the booker, the matchmaker.
Oh my goodness, they got a fight going on here.
You know, they had just beat the hell out of each other. And when Brian Pillman was ready to quit, when it was time for him to leave, it was like,
I respect you, Booker man.
Yeah, I respect you, Booker man. The mere fact that he was acknowledging on national television that Kevin Sullivan was a head writer of a wrestling show was something that had never been done before.
Those that knew, and those that didn't know would need to find out what a Booker man meant.
It was a big thing because those guys are sensitive about exposing the business.
When you're acting out a storyline, it's considered a work. And a lot of the boys backstage weren't really sure if this was real or if this was a work.
The wrestling locker room had never been invaded that way before.
Because he knew if the other wrestlers believed it was real, then they would tell the newsletter editors, wow, that guy's really nuts, and the word would travel.
I thought, this is going down bad. Brian's getting fired, and I'm out of contact with him anyway, so I think he's completely lost his mind. You know, he's not even talking to me anymore.
The smart fans were starting to figure out that wrestling is manipulated, it's choreographed, it's predetermined. But that guy's nuts, and he's real, and he won't do what they tell him. And that sells tickets because you had no idea what or whether it was supposed to happen or not. He was convincing people that he was insane.
Not only were the fans ready to be fooled, but all the wrestlers were, the management people were. There was a whole bunch of people that you could play like a violin.
Brian, I'd like to know, no, I'm not nervous. I'm not nervous at all.
Hey, should be.
I don't think anybody, for sure, at any given moment, knew if or not they were really being worked by Brian.
But then he ended up working Bischoff.
I said, get him to give you some kind of release from his contract, from your contract.
Brian says to Eric Bischoff, if you fire me and then I bust out on TV the week afterwards and people will know that this has just gone out of control.
The people in the office, the bookkeepers, whatever, if they see that I'm still under contract, they're gonna tell Dave, and everyone's gonna know that it's all a work. So you have to really fire me.
If you give me this legitimate termination letter, then I can show it to everybody. And I can say, look what the guy did. Can you believe this? Can you believe he fired me?
He did. He gave him a release.
So he was then free to negotiate with Vince McMahon and the WWF against Eric Bischoff and WCW so he could get a better deal. All because Bischoff thought that he was working with Brian to create this illusion, and Brian was actually working Bischoff to create his own illusion.
Dude, I mean, how do you do that? I don't know anybody else that ever did that. Yeah, stroke of genius.
I mean, it was a legitimate termination, but it was a legitimate termination with a wink and a nod. I said, Brian, go to WWF. I can't give you what you want. Get yourself over there so that when you come back, and I promise you I will bring you back, it'll give me the ability to pay you more because you've raised your own value.
In his world, it's his stunt. He is flattered that he's the guy that's pulling the great stunt, even though he was the power to begin with.
For anyone to suggest that the loose cannon character was designed to manipulate me into giving Brian Pillman more money, when in fact Brian Pillman and I discussed how to make this character work even better so that at some point I could give him the money, it kind of flies in the face of the rumors and the innuendo.
Well, man, that's the greatest thing you can do. If you can somebody over and have them think that it's a great idea, that's, you know, I mean, that's the trick of breaking up with a woman. You know, make her think that it's her idea.
As a free agent, Brian takes charge of his own appearances and publicity. His insider knowledge, mastery of manipulation, and disregard for exposing the industry solidifies his position as the ultimate ringmaster.
In the wrestling war layout at the time, the fans knew one thing: if you are really working for one promotion, you can't appear for any of the others.
Tonight will be one of the most extreme hours of wrestling. Hey, wait a minute.
The things of trying to prove it was real is that WCW hated ECW, so Bryan must be on the outs with WCW.
Renegade promotion ECW is gaining traction for pushing the boundaries of wrestling and is the perfect stage for the loose cannon's unpredictable antics.
He could curse, he could say off-color things.
Eric Bischoff is each and every one of these mother smart marks rolled up into one giant piece of shit.
I thought Bryan was losing his mind as opposed to being, you know, brilliant.
I loved it. I was just nothing but entertained by it. Damn near whipped it out, was gonna piss in the ring. That's a pretty strong statement. And pardon my language, I'm like, man, this motherfucker's out there. You know, and I mean that in a good way.
Get him the hell out of here.
This stuff was working on both levels. The fans who weren't inside, they just thought that he was crazy and he was doing wild, over-the-top things. But for the fans who did know the inside terminology or were with the secrets, they were like, they can't be allowing him to do that. When he would have a television appearance, it would be arranged so that it didn't look like he was supposed to be there, or he was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. One time, he even, to protest the matches that he'd been given, he wrestled a giant pencil, because pencil in inside wrestling knowledge was another name for the booker.
I always end up fighting with the pencil.
And then he's showing up and doing these funny little vignettes. He's got when he's cooking and flames are going out of the frying pan. And they hired a woman with a baby. And then the guy comes to punch Pillman and he grabs the baby and holds the baby up in front. And
you scum, you piece of...
And I never once called Bryan and said, hey, dude, are you working? Are you shooting? You know, because I didn't want to know. But I thought what he was doing was damn sure brilliant.
Some people think my dad was crazy, and then, you know, other people are like, you know, your dad was, you know, not crazy. That was just a gimmick. And a lot of people say he kind of fell into that. Like they couldn't decipher if it was, is this Bryan Pillman now? Or, you know, like, is he still in character, or is this just how he is?
It's all just their perception of reality.
It was just like this blur between like what is actually going on. Like you don't even know anymore. But that was like the magic of it.
There was a lot of Andy Kaufman in Bryan. The loose cannon became Bryan. That was who he was.
Bryan was a renegade. Bryan was a little bit of an outlaw. Again, remember, when you're not the biggest dog of the litter, and you got that gravelly voice, you've had 30+ throat operations when you're a small child, you get an attitude. And I've said this many times, the greatest wrestlers I've ever worked with are essentially natural, organic extensions of their own personality. And the loose cannon was just that.
I think the message that Bryan showing up in ECW sent to the other two companies is he's a free agent, that he was a gunslinger and he'd go to the highest bidder.
Vince is watching this. It's the hottest thing in wrestling. The only one that really knew what was going on was Dave Meltzer. I said, hey, we have to tell Meltzer. I value his friendship more than I value, you know, any of this shit.
Something happened, I called up Kim and I go, oh God, Bryan's in trouble. He just goes, you know, like, Bryan's doing this. He's come up with a character and you got to work everybody. Bryan goes, what'd I do with Dave? And he goes, you don't talk to Dave, because if you tell him, then he's gonna have to say it, because that's his role, and I don't want you lying to him. So literally, like, he didn't talk to me for a couple of months there. Yeah, without a doubt, he wanted to fool me with the character. And he did for a while.
And again, who are the real marks? Who are the ultimate marks? Bischoff, and then we got Vince.
Vince McMahon was then, as he is now, the undisputed leader, ruler, manipulator, organizer, and owner of World Wrestling Entertainment.
What did you think of Vince at that time?
Vince?
Yeah, you personally.
Yeah, what do you know what you do with a whore? You That's what I thought of Vince. That's all I think of Vince.
As Brian becomes the talk of the wrestling world, it's time for the final step of his master plan: track down and secure the attention of wrestling's biggest power player. In perhaps his boldest stunt yet, Brian Pillman plots to get the attention of Vince McMahon at an insider industry trade show in Las Vegas, the last place anyone would expect to see the loose cannon.
Okay, so I'm in Vegas. I was in there and I was leaving, and Brian's coming, and Brian's in full gimmick at this point. And then I see him, hey, Dave, whatever. I'm leaving, he goes, can I get your credential? And I go, yeah, here's my credential. And he went in and makes a beeline for Jim Ross and Vince McMahon.
He had an idea to be the most outrageous, outlandish, over-the-top character that Vince McMahon had ever met. He's going to try to get Vince McMahon's attention.
Doing his whole Brian Pillman, hey, Vince, hey, let's take a picture.
Vince McMahon, mother, God almighty.
It's the greatest thing in the world. I got a chance to meet you, and they get their arm around, and somebody takes a picture.
And Vince is like, who is this guy? He made an impression. You didn't know whether he was a homicidal maniac or just a guy that was having fun?
McMahon thought, I can't hire this guy, JR. We can't hire this guy, JR. He's crazy. I said, he's crazy like a fox. What do you mean? Well, he told me what he was going to do. He did? Yeah, he's creative. He's bold. He's kind of like you are, Vince. He'll take a chance. Brian's balls at that point in that day would probably fit in a wheelbarrow.
Dude, when you work Vince McMahon, you know, especially back in the day, pretty good rib. It got his attention, too. It was pretty freaking genius, is what he was doing.
But he wanted to stay in WCW because WWF didn't offer guaranteed money. And also, Vince was always pushing the bigger guys. So Brian always felt that WCW was his company and the company he would do the best in anyway. People go like, oh, he did this manipulation of his contract to go to WWF. No, he did the manipulation of his contract to be able to negotiate with WWF to raise his money with WCW.
Brian's bold plan is a success, as he is in negotiations for major contracts with both WCW and WWF. All he has to do is choose the right path.
It didn't matter, like, if where he wound up, it was just...
No! It's money! It's the bottom line! It's money! And these people are in fantasy land. It is money. The only problem is, like the Hebrew saying, man plans and God laughs.
We're talking, and it's always about, you know, I gotta save money, and then he buys an $80,000 Humvee. I couldn't fathom the idea of, I got 5 kids, I've gotta make money now, I've gotta save money, and then buying a Humvee.
God, he would drive that wherever Brian wanted to drive that. He didn't want to sit at the stoplight. He drove down a gully and up the other side in the Hummer. He didn't, you know, follow the rules.
I was actually in Miami modeling, but I called to check on the kids. And the neighbor across the street, I called her because I didn't get an answer. And she said, my God, I just passed the Hummer and little Brian's car seat's out in the middle of the yard and big Brian's being flown to the hospital.
I remember he flipped it, rolled it. It was severe.
The wreck happened during the negotiations. They're getting damaged goods.
It was truly the deal of you can get on the tiger's back, but how do you get off? Fate figured that out.
There'd been a lot of wrestler deaths, but not of a guy who was actually on the way to the show at that moment.
It's like if Brian could just see the future and what happened, Brian would, oh my God, no drugs, no nothing. I know it would have scared him straight.
It's crazy how you go from having a silver platter growing up to not even knowing when your next meal is going to be.
The Clash of Authority, a detective's conviction against a coroner's dogma. The evening of May 24th, 1992, bore down with a heavy burden of unresolved questions surrounding the perplexing death of Single, Mother Gail Mosby. Into this fraught atmosphere stepped Jackson Police Homicide Detective Al Ledoux, a figure renowned for his keen intellect and an almost obsessive attention to detail. He was a great detective, and he paid attention to detail. Unlike many who might be swayed by the initial pronouncements, Detective Ledoux approached the scene not with a preconceived notion of suicide, but with the necessary open mind of an investigator tasked with uncovering the truth, however ugly it might be. He immediately started working as a murderer. This mindset is crucial in complex cases. It ensures that no possibility is prematurely discarded, while acknowledging all potential scenarios, including an accidental overdose or severe reaction to medication. There was a possibility that maybe she took some meds and just had a bad reaction. But, you got to explore all possibilities. His underlying professional instinct whispered of foul play. The paradox was stark. There was absolutely nothing that would indicate anything was wrong other than there was a dead woman in the bathtub. This very lack of overt chaos in the presence of death gnawed at him. He and I both just knew there was just something we were missing, but we didn't know what it was, and he was going to find it. His determination, a hallmark of excellent detective work, would be paramount in unraveling this knot. Detective Ledoux conducted a meticulous, painstaking sweep of the entire residence. His initial findings aligned with earlier observations. No overt signs of forced entry or violent struggle. He looked around a lot and did not see anything turn over, no indication anybody had tried to break in a window or the door. The house stubbornly maintained its deceptive air of undisturbed normalcy, almost as if its stillness was a carefully constructed lie. However, a single, seemingly minor detail escaped the illusion and caught his trained eye. A framed picture. But he did happen to notice that there was a framed picture. The glass was cracked. This was not just a broken object. It was an incongruity, a physical anomaly in an otherwise pristine environment, a tiny rupture in the fabric of the stage scene. The more I looked at it, the more I got suspicious of it, and so was the lead detective. He and I, we just said there's something wrong. The cracked glass, a subtle yet significant detail, withheld from the public, would later become a critical validation of insider knowledge, proving invaluable in discerning truth from deception. Despite these escalating suspicions among the police, the official determination of the cause and, more critically, the manner of death ultimately rested with the county coroner. The roles are distinct. While the police investigate the crime, the coroner investigates the death. The crime scene's mine. The homicide case is a homicide detective's, but the body belongs to the coroner. As part of his official duties, the coroner arrived, formally pronounced Gale deceased, and conducted his own visual assessment of the scene and the body. As part of his duty, he pronounced her deceased and, looked at the scene, and there was nothing to indicate foul play. He noted a minor injury, a small blemish that, in isolation, seemed inconsequential. There was a small abrasion on her nose, but nothing that indicated that anybody had beaten her into an unconscious state and put her in the bathtub. Based on these observations, and perhaps influenced by the initial presentation of the scene and the suicide narrative, the coroner made his ruling. Gale's death was accidental drowning. This ruling struck a discordant note, directly clashing with the growing instincts and professional suspicions of the police officers. Present, the experienced officer who had first questioned the shallow water, unable to let the medical opinion stand unchallenged, voiced his profound skepticism. I said, "Really? Can you really drown in this bathtub?" The coroner's response was not one of reasoned medical explanation, but one of dismissive, authoritative pronouncement. And his word was to me exactly this. He said, "You can if I say you can." This statement, delivered with an air of unyielding finality, exposed a troubling inflexibility, an ego-driven adherence to an initial, unchallenged judgment. And I knew then, okay, this is where it's going to go. This moment marked a severe professional rift, a clash between scientific investigation and unyielding authority. He and I got along up until this point, all the years we worked together, but I thought it was a bad judgment call on his part, and he wasn't willing to look at any other options. The coroner, for reasons that might include professional pride, institutional inertia, or perhaps a genuine misinterpretation of the initial evidence. Dug his heels on this particular case due to the fact that the lead and I both felt that there was something wrong. This intellectual stubbornness, a common human failing that can plague even professionals, became a significant obstacle to justice. Despite the official ruling, Detective Ledoux and his determined colleagues were far from deterred. They understood the critical importance of maintaining an open avenue for future inquiry, ensuring that the investigation did not simply close based on a potentially flawed initial judgment. We put on our offense, report there was a death pending, and that left the door open for us for further investigation. This subtle but profoundly significant bureaucratic maneuver allowed them to circumvent the immediate finality of the coroner's ruling, granting them the legal and procedural space to continue their pursuit of the truth, even if it meant challenging a fellow official. For the moment, however, the grim realities of their duty persisted. Their next heart-wrenching step was to formally inform Gail's immediate family of her death, framed by the official yet contentious determination of apparent suicide. This notification, presented with official gravity, would soon unleash a torrent of pain and a fierce rebuttal from those who knew Gail best. The shattered innocence, a father's task in children's indignance. The most painful task following Gail's death fell upon her ex-husband, Richard, delivering the devastating news to their two young sons. It was a moment of profound trauma, an emotional earthquake that would forever alter the landscape of their childhood. He said, "Look, we got to tell you something. Your mom's dead." For a child, such words are an immediate assault on comprehension, an unfathomable blow to the very foundation of their world. Joseph's immediate reaction was a desperate, almost primal attempt to return to the familiar, to refute the unbearable reality. And I said, "You're joking." The innocence of childhood, desperately seeking reassurance, grapples awkwardly with the brutal finality of death. But the undeniable truth manifested in his father's grief, an overwhelming torrent of emotion that could not be feigned. Well, then my dad started crying, and then I knew, and I collapsed, and I'll never remember getting up. The memory of physical collapse, a visceral manifestation of shock and sorrow, illustrated the profound depth of his initial anguish and the indelible mark it left upon him. Even at their tender ages, young Joseph and Bill possessed a rudimentary understanding of the concept of suicide. Yet, this concept, when applied to their vibrant, loving mother, was something they vehemently rejected, an idea so alien to her character as to be utterly absurd. Even at that age, I understood what suicide was. So to have someone tell me that my mom committed suicide was just the most absurd thing that I could think of. This was not merely the denial of grief. It was a deeply ingrained conviction rooted in their intimate, lived experience of their mother, Gail's unwavering love for them, her steadfast commitment to their well-being, her resilient spirit. These fundamental aspects of her being rendered the idea of her willingly, abandoning them an absolute impossibility. The official explanation clashed violently and irreconcilably with their profound and unwavering knowledge of their mother's essence. They intuitively understood that the Gail they knew, the Gail who lived for her children, could never choose to leave them by her own hand. This inner conviction would fuel their later fight for truth, an emotional anchor in a storm of adult deception, whispers of a grudge, the looming shadow of a new life. As investigators continued their protocol, reaching out to more of Gail's family about the perplexing circumstances of her death, a consistent and insistent chorus of disbelief emerged. Her loved ones did not merely question the suicide theory. They emphatically declared their belief that someone had actively caused her demise. A particularly chilling piece of information surfaced from Gail's sister, a premonition, a moment of profound fear Gail herself had expressed just weeks prior to her death. 2 weeks prior to her death, Aunt Gail called my mom and was worried that something was going to happen, and she said she didn't feel safe. This direct expression of vulnerability, a desperate plea for reassurance to her sister, now resonated with tragic and profound significance. Hindsight casting an unbearable weight on the recollection. Gail's sister, in an attempt to provide comfort, inadvertently cut short their final conversation, a memory that would forever haunt her. My mom, as a sister, would do. I tried to reassure her, I'm sure everything's going to be fine. But my mom had to go, so she cut the conversation short. And unfortunately, that was the last time she spoke with her. The heartbreaking irony of this last, abbreviated conversation, intended to soothe, instead became a source of enduring regret and amplified suspicion. Gail's sister harbored a strong, growing suspicion that these voiced concerns were directly linked to Richard, her ex-husband, and his new wife, Deborah. Tension had been steadily escalating, an increasingly palpable animosity. Ever since Deborah and Richard had married 4 years earlier, the once admirable, amicable co-parenting relationship that had previously characterized Gail and Richard's post-divorce. Dynamic had fundamentally and irrevocably shifted under this new influence. After the divorce, Aunt Gail and Uncle Richard, they were very amicable, co-parented very well. This healthy, mature approach to their shared parental responsibilities had been a credit to them both. However, after Debbie came into the picture, the parenting dynamic changed a little bit. Deborah, often referred to simply as Debbie, brought with her a complex and shadowed personal history before her union with Richard. Debbie was married before she met my dad. She had 2 children. One of them did not survive infancy. Following her marriage to Richard, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah. It was within this newly formed blended family dynamic that Gail's sons, Bill and Joseph, acutely observed a stark and profoundly troubling disparity in treatment. Debbie treated my brother and I tremendously different than the way she treated Sarah. This unequal and emotionally harmful favoritism fostered an environment where Bill and Joseph increasingly felt marginalized, secondary, and unloved. Debbie and my father's relationship sort of made us a little bit more secondary. The boys perceived a new, dominant force subtly but definitively controlling their lives. A third party that controlled what we were going to be doing. This control was not benevolent. It was perceived as punitive and arbitrary, particularly toward them as Gail's children. The previously amicable relationship between Gail and Richard, once a model of responsible co-parenting, devolved rapidly into a series of contentious legal skirmishes, a stark and bitter contrast to their earlier cooperation. All of a sudden, my mom and my dad, they started having custody battles. They're in and out of court. There's alimony disputes. And it was clear that Debbie was the one spearheading those problems. Gail's family consistently identified Deborah's insidious influence as the primary driver behind these escalating conflicts, injecting an unprecedented level of animosity where genuine cooperation had once flourished. Deborah, they told the police, harbored a deep-seated resentment towards anything that served as a reminder of Richard's life before her, and most acutely towards Gail herself. She didn't even like the fact that my Aunt Gail didn't change her last name post-divorce. This seemingly trivial matter, a practical decision for Gail rooted in maintaining her son's shared last name, was perceived by Deborah as an intolerable symbolic link to Richard's past. Aunt Gail simply stated it was because that was her boy's last name, but I know it very much was a problem for Debbie. For Deborah, Gail's continued use of the Mosby name represented an unresolved thread, a persistent threat to her carefully constructed narrative, a new, perfect family unit. From a psychological perspective, this type of obsessive control and resentment often characterizes individuals with a fragile ego and a profound need for absolute dominance within their immediate sphere. Deborah seemed incapable of tolerating any perceived threat or competition, however minor. The emotional climate within the two households, as experienced by Gail's sons, painted an extraordinarily stark and telling picture. There couldn't be a more striking difference living with my dad and Debbie versus living with my Mom. My mom was loving, living with my dad and Debbie. It was like a complete absence of love. This profound emotional void, juxtaposed against Gail's overflowing warmth, provided a chilling insight into Deborah's character. Her animosity towards Gail was not merely passive. It was overtly expressed, venomous and unyielding. Debbie was very nasty towards my Aunt Gail. It was very evident that she did not like her. The hostility extended beyond mere dislike, manifesting in active acts of harassment, petty yet deeply unsettling forms of sabotage designed to inflict stress and difficulty on Gail's life. Her utility's been cut off. She had no proof who it was, but we all assumed, Gail and me and the police department, that it was coming from Debbie. These repeated, vexatious acts bespoke a personality driven by spite, a compulsive desire to cause misery and instability in Gail's life. Investigators also gleaned a crucial piece of information connecting Deborah's harassment to Gail's emotional turmoil. The relentless pressure and drama originating from Deborah had been a significant contributing factor to Gail's recent breakup, the very heartbreak documented in her private journal. Whatever relationship that Gail had with a woman that ended because of all the drama that was involved in it. The corrosive influence of Deborah's actions was thus not confined to the custody battles. It infiltrated and actively sabotaged Gail's attempts to forge new, healthy personal relationships. This pattern suggested an individual bent on isolating and dismantling Gail's life piece by piece, an act of psychological torment preceding the ultimate physical violence. The depth of this animosity and its destructive reach was clearly evident, shifting the focus of the investigation towards a malevolent third party. However, despite these compelling anecdotal accounts from Gail's grieving loved ones and the growing, pervasive suspicion among investigators, law enforcement faced a daunting and immediate challenge. But without evidence to support the idea of murder, there is little investigators can do. The official coroner's ruling of accidental death, initially unchecked by a comprehensive autopsy, combined with the lack of definitive forensic evidence of overt foul play at the scene, formed a formidable barrier to an active homicide inquiry. In the absence of some information that indicated death by another identifiable person, there just wasn't anywhere to go with it. The case, for a time, settled into a somber stasis, a file awaiting the spark of a new lead, a piece of irrefutable information that could finally crack open the meticulously constructed facade, and so nothing really happened until the fall. The passage of months, however, would only intensify the family's conviction, allowing the seeds of suspicion to germinate and eventually blossom into a revelation that would shatter the official narrative. The terrified informant, a crack in the wall of silence, a glimmer of truth. For agonizing months after Gail Mosby's death, as the leaves began to turn in September, a pivotal moment arrived, one that would irrevocably alter the course of the dormant investigation. A woman, later identified as Vicky Mordecai, sought refuge and protection at the office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation on a quiet Sunday afternoon, radiating an almost palpable fear. And she was terrified. Her appearance, unannounced and desperate, signaled a deep personal crisis. What she divulged to the FBI agent was nothing short of astonishing. A cascade of information that connected disparate criminal enterprises to the heart of Gail Mosby's death, and what she said changed the investigation. Vicky Mordecai's intricate tale began not with murder, but with a clandestine criminal operation. What Vicky Mordecai tells this FBI agent was that she and her husband, a guy named Ricky Mordecai, were in the business of raising marijuana up in northeast Mississippi, and an entire crop had disappeared. This illicit enterprise had entangled them with Vicky's stepfather, Roy Kyle, a man now making grave accusations. They were in business with her stepfather, Roy Kyle. Roy Kyle was accusing them of having stolen the crop. This accusation had escalated terrifyingly, mutating into a threat of ultimate retribution. She told them that her stepfather, she felt, was going to hire a hitman to kill her and her husband. Her fear was profoundly real, further intensified by a chilling piece of prior knowledge, and that she was terrified because she knew that he had hired a hitman to kill someone else. Previously, this precedent, a cold-blooded act in the past, rendered her present fear deeply credible. It was at this critical juncture that Vicky Mordecai, driven by self-preservation, dropped a bombshell directly pertinent to the Jackson case. She began to describe this previous murder, a crime whose intimate details had been meticulously kept from public disclosure by investigators. A woman in Jackson, Gail Mosby, she began to describe the scenario, this woman in the bathtub. Her narrative, astonishing in its specificity, included a minute yet crucial detail, an investigative secret that would serve as irrefutable proof of her insider knowledge. They went over to this woman's house and, killed her, she said in the course of it. Something glass got broken. The FBI agent, initially encountering Vicky's sensational narrative, approached it with the necessary skepticism due to its outlandish nature. He looks at this set of circumstances and says, "Well, I don't know. This is a little too crazy." Such claims, particularly from individuals involved in criminal enterprises, are often embellished or fabricated. However, the mention of the broken glass, a specific, forensic detail deliberately withheld from the public domain by Jackson police, immediately transformed Vicky's seemingly wild tale into a credible, undeniable lead. This detail, a quiet whisper in the official records, now screamed the truth. The agent, recognizing profound significance of this corroborating detail, wasted no time. He immediately contacted the Jackson Police Department's Homicide and Robbery Division, knowing he had information that demanded their immediate attention. But he called the Jackson Police Department Homicide and Robbery Division. When the Jackson homicide detectives heard about the broken glass, an investigative detail only known to them and a handful of first responders, they immediately knew that Vicky Mordecai was speaking the truth. This crucial piece of information, carefully guarded precisely to filter out false confessions or imaginative fabrications, served as the ultimate validator of her testimony. When Jackson homicide detectives hear about the broken glass, they immediately know Vicky is telling the truth because that detail was never made public. The detectives, sensing a monumental breakthrough, wasted no time in arranging an in-person interview. So the detective said, "I want to talk to her." Vicky Mordecai arrived, recounting her terrifying, convoluted story to the Jackson police with unwavering conviction. So she came over there and, told him the story. The paramount question from the detective focused on the provenance of her extraordinary information, and he says, "From whom did you get this information?" Her answer would, with shocking directness, place Deborah Mosby squarely at the epicenter of the murder conspiracy. She told him that she had heard this from her sister, Debbie Mosby. According to Vicky's testimony, corroborated by police suspicion, her and Deborah's stepfather, Roy Kyle, functioned as the intermediary, the man with the necessary unsavory connections within the criminal underworld. The true architect of the plot, however, was none other than Deborah Mosby herself, a chilling confirmation of Gail's family's deepest fears and suspicions. Deborah said, "I need somebody to take care of Gail. Can you help me with it?" Roy Kyle, a man seemingly accustomed to such illicit requests, readily affirmed his capacity to assist. He said, "Well, yeah, I know somebody whom I can help you." Vicky proceeded to detail the alleged sequence of events surrounding Gail's murder, information meticulously relayed to her by Deborah. What Vicky says that Deborah Mosby told her was that Billy Ray Ford, this hitman, had come over to their home. They lived in Canton, picked up her husband, Richard Mosby, and they drove over to Gail's house. The puzzling lack of forced entry, an observation that had initially confounded police suspicions and supported the suicide narrative, was now chillingly explained, revealing a calculated betrayal of trust. There was no sign of any forced entry because Gail thought she was only letting Richard in, and she didn't know Billy Ray was hiding behind the door. This detail underscored the insidious nature of the crime, access gained not by force, but by a deceptive familiarity, exploiting Gail's trust in her ex-husband. Vicky's account continued, describing the violent and terrifying confrontation that ensued once the door was opened. Vicky says once the door was open, Billy Ray attacked Gail. And in the brutal reality of the struggle, the minor detail of the cracked picture frame, initially a forensic anomaly, was explained and tragically confirmed. And in the ensuing struggle, the picture frame shattered. The method of incapacitation, cold and deliberate, was also revealed. The murderer had covered her mouth and nose with a rag, soaked with something until she was unconscious. The implied use of a chemical agent, likely chloroform or a similar substance, to subdue Gail without leaving overt signs of a physical struggle, aligned perfectly with the scene's neatness and the minor abrasion noted on her nose. Once rendered unconscious, the final, fatal act was carried out with chilling efficiency. And then he had taken her to the bathtub, poured the water until it got high enough and it drowned her. This gruesome narrative not only provided a horrifying sequence of events, but also unequivocally corroborated the police's early instincts regarding the deliberate, homicidal nature of the drowning. The coroner's initial ruling of accidental death, viewed through the lens of Vicky's testimony, now appeared dangerously misguided and woefully insufficient. Investigators, seizing upon these profound revelations, immediately initiated a comprehensive background check on the alleged hitman, Billy Ray Ford. His criminal record provided immediate validation, revealing a history of violence that rendered him entirely capable of such an act. When investigators run a background check on the alleged hitman, Billy Ray Ford, they find a history of violence, including a past conviction for the attempted murder of the sheriff in Warren County, Mississippi. While this conviction had been later overturned on appeal due to legal technicalities, diminishing its immediate legal utility, it nonetheless served as a stark indicator of his violent propensities and criminal connections. It was reversed on appeal, so that was not a viable conviction to use against him. But, he was a known criminal element out there. Armed with his knowledge, detectives quickly issued a be on the lookout for Ford and, with renewed and targeted focus, redirected their full attention to Deborah Mosby. Deborah's deep-seated animosity towards Gail, previously contextualized as mere domestic squabbling, now took on a much darker and more sinister hue. We knew she was harassing Gail to the point of utter absurdity just to get her to back off, collecting the child support that she was certainly entitled to. This documented history of harassment, coupled with the potent motive of financial control and personal vengeance, along with Vicky Mordecai's detailed and chillingly accurate testimony, provided the Jackson police with sufficient probable cause and enough leverage to formally open an official, full-scale murder investigation. The long-held suspicion, initially buried under the weight of an erroneous official pronouncement, now resurfaced with undeniable urgent force. We believe at that point that Gail did not commit suicide. That did not happen. So we've got to do something about this. The painstaking and dedicated hunt for justice, now clearly defined, had officially and irrevocably commenced. The invisible recorder, a tapestry of deceit woven with electronic threads, with Richard and Deborah Mosby unequivocally identified as the primary suspects in the callous murder of his ex-wife, Gail. The prosecution understood that mere suspicion, or even the compelling testimony of a terrified informant, was not enough to secure a conviction in a court of law. Legal rigor demanded direct, corroborating evidence, something irrefutable and concrete. With strategic foresight, detectives approached Ricky and Vicky Mordecai, the very individuals who had broken the case open, with a delicate and critical request to wear a hidden recording device, colloquially known as a wire, With more direct evidence needed, detectives asked both Ricky and Vicky Mordecai to wear a wire. The Mordecais, still genuinely and justifiably terrified for their lives, believing that Billy Ray Ford, having allegedly executed Gale, might indeed come for them as Roy Kyle had threatened, agreed to cooperate. Driven by the desperate hope for protection, Ricky and Vicky get wired up. They go up to Richard and Deborah's house. Their pretext for this perilous visit was ingeniously crafted around their very real fear, a fear ironically linked directly to the murder they were helping to expose. Ricky and Vicky are still thinking that Billy Ray Ford has a contract to kill them, so they go there to talk to Deborah and Richard about how terrified they are, and can Deborah intervene and keep this pit man from coming kill them just as he did Gale. This ingenious ruse allowed them to approach the suspects under a guise of shared vulnerability and a plea for intervention, maximizing the chances that Richard and Deborah would speak candidly. With investigators listening in, their ears acutely tuned to every syllable transmitted by the hidden wires, Deborah made admissions that, while meticulously avoiding a direct confession of murder, were nonetheless profoundly incriminating. She acknowledged her familiarity with Billy Ray Ford, but steadfastly denied issuing a direct command for murder. With investigators listening in, Deborah admits knowing Billy Ray but denies hiring him to kill anyone. However, the language she employed, a careful verbal dance around explicit terminology, nevertheless revealed a chillingly malevolent intent, a desire to eliminate Gale without explicitly uttering the forbidden word. What Deborah was talking about was not that she hired him to murder her. She hired him to go over there and scare her or rough her up, or, just make her go away. This chilling euphemism for extreme violence, the desire for Gale to go away, clearly articulated a sinister purpose, a profound will to remove her from their lives by any means necessary, short of an outright admission of ordering her death. The precision of the analyst's ear could detect the evasion, the unspoken but palpable menace. The language is not the smoking gun we want, but it's helpful. It was a powerful indicator of her deep-seated animosity and manipulative nature, revealing her desire for the end result, regardless of the method, and subtly deflecting personal accountability for the fatal outcome. Crucially, the wiretap operation yielded something even more significant than a semi-confession, an admission, however indirect, that firmly established the physical presence of the key players at the very scene of the crime. It does in fact establish that Billy Ray Ford and Richard Mosby were in the house when Gale died, and they weren't there for honorable purposes. This was a pivotal piece of evidence, placing both Richard, Gale's ex-husband, and the alleged hitman Billy Ray Ford inside Gale's residence at the time of her demise. Their presence, combined with Deborah's carefully phrased but revealing statements, began to paint a far clearer picture of complicity, calculated deception, and unmistakable foul play. The narrative of suicide was now not merely disputed. It was actively being dismantled, brick by meticulous brick, through these hidden recordings, digital breadcrumbs, the network of calls. Following the successful sting operation, law enforcement swiftly issued a subpoena for Deborah Mosby's phone records, a standard investigative procedure that, in modern criminal cases, often uncovers intricate and revealing networks of communication. The resulting call logs proved to be a damning mosaic of evidence, a digital breadcrumb trail leading directly to the heart of the conspiracy. About a month prior to Gale's death, one night Deborah Mosby calls her stepfather, who happens to have connections with a hitman. This established a critical initial link, tracing the genesis of the plot. The nefarious connection then spiraled through the underworld, illuminating the chain of command and communication. Roy calls Billy Ray Ford, who in turn calls Deborah, and then Deborah calls him back. The meticulously time-stamped call records revealed an escalating and highly suspicious frequency of communication between parties who, prior to this, were complete strangers. To our knowledge, Deborah had never known Billy Ray Ford before she was put in touch with him by Roy Carr. Yet, the hard data from the call logs presented an irrefutable contradiction. Call logs show that in the month leading up to Gail's death, Deborah and Billy Ray spoke several times. The sudden, repeated, and intense communication between two individuals who, ostensibly, shared no prior relationship or legitimate connection, spoke volumes. These people don't know each other from Adam's house, but they're having all these conversations. This pattern of secretive communication, when analyzed in conjunction with Vicky Mordecai's detailed and validated testimony and the compelling recordings from the wiretap, collectively build an exceptionally robust and irrefutable circumstantial case. Each call, a tiny flicker of light, when aggregated, illuminated the darkness of the conspiracy. It looked pretty bad, smelled pretty bad, but did we really have it? Not so sure. Despite the lack of an overt, explicit confession of murder or the impossible presence of a direct eyewitness to the actual drowning, the sheer weight of the accumulated, interlocking evidence was now undeniable, providing the critical mass required to move forward with formal charges. So we indicted them for conspiracy to commit murder. The meticulous groundwork laid by the investigators had paid off, meticulously weaving together disparate threads into an unbreakable rope of legal accountability. The unmasking and the children's renewed nightmare. The authorities, armed with a formidable array of evidence, moved swiftly and decisively. Richard, Deborah, and Billy Ray Ford were apprehended and arrested without incident, marking a dramatic and publicly astonishing conclusion to months of painstaking, covert investigation. The bizarre and cold-blooded murder plot, previously veiled in secrecy, immediately seized headlines throughout the region, capturing the stunned attention of a public aghast at the unfolding drama. For Gail's children, Joseph and Bill, the arrests brought a confusing amalgam of validation and a renewed wave of profound pain. The previous attempts by their father and stepmother to manipulate their young minds, to deflect blame onto their loving maternal family, were now exposed as calculated, cruel falsehoods. My father and Debbie, they were trying to tell us that it was my grandparents and my aunts, and they were out to get us. The insidious nature of such psychological manipulation on grieving children cannot be overstated. There's no truth to it. For Joseph, the news of his stepmother, Deborah's, arrest provided a disturbing, yet almost cathartic, sense of alignment with his long-held suspicions. Whenever I found out that Debbie was also arrested, my initial thoughts were, this sort of makes sense. His young, intuitive understanding of her animosity towards his mother, now seemingly validated by the severity of the criminal charges, confirmed his darkest, most terrifying fears. It offered a grim clarity amidst the confusion. However, the arrest of his own father, Richard, delivered a different, far more agonizing blow, shattering the remaining fragments of a cherished childhood image. I didn't think that my dad would have done something like that. That wasn't who he was. The cherished image of his happy or smiley father, the great dad from his earliest, most innocent memories, clashed violently and irreconcilably with the horrifying reality of a man implicated in a cold-blooded murder. The psychological trauma of such a revelation, the catastrophic shattering of a child's fundamental perception of a parent's love and protection, is profound and leaves scars that last a lifetime. The ground beneath their feet had once again shifted, but this time, the seismic shock revealed a horrifying truth rather than a tragic accident. Echoes of a dark past, a chilling repetition of tragedy. The news of Deborah Mosby's arrest resonated far beyond the confines of Jackson, Mississippi, traveling through invisible channels to reach individuals from her earlier life who held chillingly relevant information. News of the arrest also reaches someone from Deborah's past. One such individual was Deborah's ex-husband, a man named Mike McLean. Prompted by the shocking headlines, Mike contacted authorities, offering a deeply disturbing fragment of Deborah's history. Information that casts an even darker and more sinister shadow on her character and modus operandi. Deborah's ex-husband, who's a guy named Mike McLean. He contacted me and told me some just horrendous things about her. Mike McLean's account focused on a profoundly tragic event that had occurred in May 1988, years before his divorce from Deborah. They had 2 children together at the time. They had a child named Angel, and Angel was wheelchair-bound. And then they had another small child. It was this younger child who became the victim of a horrifying, eerily familiar incident. Mike told me that the wheelchair-bound child was supposed to be watching the child in the bathtub, and the child drowned. The striking parallels were impossible to ignore: a domestic setting, a bathtub, and the tragic, premature drowning of a child. What rendered Mike McLean's testimony even more deeply disturbing, particularly to criminal psychologists, was Deborah's alleged reaction and her immediate, callous attempt to deflect blame. Mike said that Deborah tried to blame the wheelchair-bound child for the negligence that caused that child to die. This detail was profoundly revealing, painting a chilling portrait of a woman utterly devoid of empathy, quick to manipulate and assign blame, even to a vulnerable child, in a desperate, self-serving attempt to escape personal responsibility for a tragedy under her direct care. The calculated cruelty in deflecting such a monumental burden onto a disabled child spoke volumes about her twisted psychological makeup and her desperate need to avoid accountability. Prosecutors, presented with this disturbing revelation, recognized the overwhelming significance of the similarities between the 2 incidents. Prosecutors can't ignore the similarities between the 2 incidents. The parallels were too stark, too chillingly consistent to be dismissed as mere coincidence. You couldn't get past the idea that we're talking about 2 people who drown in a bathtub. The sheer statistical improbability of such a recurring tragedy. Under similar circumstances, a drowning in a bathtub where Deborah Mosby held a position of responsibility was profoundly staggering. It just kind of takes your breath away, doesn't it? Nobody ever could prove anything about that, but it sure is unusual. While there was no concrete legal proof to definitively link Deborah to the child's drowning as a criminal act, the eerie repetition of elements, the pattern of behavior, the callousness, and the chilling recurrence of tragic events added a profound, unsettling layer of suspicion to the ongoing murder investigation into Gail Mosby's death. It strongly suggested a deeply disturbed individual, capable of manipulating circumstances and deflecting responsibility in the face of monumental tragedy, a psychological signature of someone willing to let others bear the consequences of her own malevolent negligence or deliberate action. Even with this new, highly suspicious discovery, providing a chilling psychological profile of Deborah Mosby, prosecutors remain keenly aware of the arduous path ahead in securing a conviction for Gail's murder. The burden of proof in the American criminal justice system is exceptionally high, demanding an undeniable standard of evidence. What you have to have in order to convict someone is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite the mounting circumstantial and testimonial evidence, the informant's testimony, the wiretap recordings, the phone records, and a profoundly disturbing historical parallel, the case still presented significant legal and evidentiary hurdles. We weren't there yet. The district attorney's office understood that they needed to continue relentlessly building an unassailable case, gathering every conceivable piece of evidence to counter potential defenses and convince a jury, beyond any doubt, the cruelty of injustice, custody to suspects, and the fight for exhumation. As the district attorney's office continued its diligent and methodical work to strengthen the murder case against Richard and Deborah Mosby, an alarming development exacerbated the emotional torment of Gail's remaining family. The court's decision to release Richard and Deborah on bail, especially in a case involving alleged murder conspiracy, was met with incredulity and outrage, fundamentally incomprehensible to the grieving children and their maternal grandparents. The DA's office continues to build its case, but their urgency increases when Richard and Deborah are released on bail. The truly horrifying twist was the accompanying custody arrangement. They had custody of the little boy. I've never known that to happen. The judicial decision inexplicably placed Bill and Joseph, the sons of the murdered Gail, and her allegedly complicit ex-husband Richard, directly under the care of Richard and Deborah. This was an act of profound and grotesque injustice, a cruel irony that forced the victims' children to reside with their mother's alleged murderers. For young Joseph, this was nothing short of a living nightmare, a terrifying reversal of the safety and normalcy he had begun to find. Richard being the natural father, they went to live with Richard and Debbie, completely believing that Debbie had killed my mom. The psychological burden on a child forced to cohabit with individuals he profoundly believes are responsible for his mother's violent death is almost unimaginable. The fear was primal, raw, and entirely rational. Now I'm living with her. I know that my life's probably in danger, too. This acute, existential dread speaks volumes about Deborah's intimidating persona and the deep-seated fear she inspired, even in children, Gail's parents, Frank and Jackie. Seeing the devastating emotional and physical toll this placement took on their grandsons, fought with fierce determination to extract them from this dangerous environment. My grandparents knew that Bill and Joe were being mistreated when they were in Richard and Deb's care, and they were doing everything they could to get custody of them. Their unwavering love and relentless legal efforts ultimately prevailed, securing custody of their grandsons. Gail's parents ultimately prevail in the custody battle. This victory, though hard won, provided a desperately needed sanctuary, allowing the traumatized boys to finally begin the slow, arduous process of healing. We moved to Baton Rouge and started to live with my grandparents, which was just life-changing because now it's the first time that we've had some sense of normalcy since my mom was killed. This act of profound familial love and protection stood as a testament to the enduring bonds that even the darkest evil could not fully sever. Meanwhile, the prosecution continued to grapple with a significant and politically charged roadblock: the steadfast refusal of the county coroner to reverse his initial ruling that Gail's death was A, suicide, despite the burgeoning evidence pointing toward homicide. The official declaration, stemming from his initial assessment, became an immovable barrier, an exercise in administrative stubbornness that directly impeded the pursuit of justice. The prosecution, however, is still facing a major roadblock, despite the evidence collected. The county coroner will not reverse his ruling that Gail's death was a suicide. The distinction between cause of death, drowning, and manner of death, homicide versus suicide, is legally critical. We knew that the cause of death was drowning, but we didn't have conclusive proof that the manner of death was homicide. Without the coroner's official change of ruling, the prosecution's case was severely hampered, lacking the formal medical determination crucial for capital murder charges. A major exacerbating factor in this predicament was the unfortunate absence of a thorough post-mortem examination during the initial phase of the investigation. She was buried without an autopsy. An autopsy, a detailed forensic examination of the body, is an indispensable tool in suspicious death investigations, providing crucial physical evidence and clarity on the precise cause and manner of death. Without it, critical forensic opportunities were lost in the immediate aftermath. Recognizing this profound deficit, the prosecution understood that to definitively prove homicide, they had only one recourse: the difficult and emotionally fraught process of exhuming Gail's body. One of the next things that we did was to get an order to have Gail's body exhumed and do an autopsy. The exhumation, a somber and meticulously orchestrated procedure, was undertaken with a specific forensic goal: to search for any chemical residue that might confirm Vicky Mordecai's testimony regarding Gail's incapacitation. One thing that we wanted to know was whether or not we could prove that she had chloroform in her system, but that was not successful. Unfortunately, the inexorable passage of time and the natural processes of decomposition had taken their toll, limiting the retrospective forensic analysis. We couldn't prove or disprove that because the body was too decomposed. While this outcome was a setback, removing a potentially vital piece of chemical evidence, it did not entirely derail the investigation. The prosecution's resolve remained unbroken, realizing that while direct chemical proof was elusive, other forensic interpretations could still validate their theory of homicide. The expert's eye, unveiling the unseen truth through forensic genius. Facing the dual challenges of an uncooperative local coroner and the forensic limitations imposed by decomposition, the prosecution wisely turned to an undisputed authority in the field of forensic pathology. The only way we were going to get this case is to call an outside pathologist. Their search for unparalleled expertise led them to a true giant in the realm of forensic science. My office hired Dr. Michael Biden, who was a premier forensic pathologist in the country. Dr. Biden, a luminary whose reputation preceded him, brought to the case an unparalleled wealth of knowledge, experience, and an extraordinary capacity for meticulous observation and deductive reasoning. The lead investigator, a detective whose own instincts had always pointed to foul play, presented Dr. Biden with the entire complex narrative of Gail's death, meticulously recounting every known detail and every unanswered question. I tell him this whole story, and it was like he knew exactly where I needed to go. Dr. Biden's expertise allowed him to immediately discern crucial details that had been previously overlooked, dismissed, or misinterpreted by others. He said, "Go get your autopsy pictures," and so I did. Upon reviewing the grim yet forensically invaluable images captured at the scene, his focus was immediate, precise, and unerring, and immediately he just zones in on this little bruise on her ankle. The seemingly minor bruise, initially catalogued but then dismissed as inconsequential in the rush of the initial investigation, now took on profound meaning under Dr. Biden's scrutinizing gaze. It was a silent witness, waiting for the right interpreter. Dr. Biden's analysis transcended mere observation. It was a brilliant forensic reconstruction of the events, meticulously grounded in established physiological and pathological principles. He knew exactly what had happened, but he said, once you're unconscious, then you're not struggling anymore. This fundamental insight provided a crucial explanation for the initial lack of major struggle at the scene, reconciling a major discrepancy in the suicide theory. He then elucidated the chilling mechanics of the drowning, painting a precise picture of how the act was carried out. They could take her unconscious body and pick her up by her ankles, place her in a body of water, and all they had to do was to get the water level over her nose. This chillingly efficient method of drowning an already incapacitated individual was entirely consistent with all the physical evidence: the shallow water in the tub, the lack of struggle marks, and the distinct nature of the drowning itself. It transformed the apparent simplicity of the scene into a stark indicator of sophisticated, calculated murder. Furthermore, Dr. Biden noticed another subtle yet absolutely critical detail revealed in the autopsy pictures: specific abrasions on Gail's nose. Dr. Biden noticed abrasions on her nose, which is consistent with a rough cloth like a towel being held over her nose. It was used to make her unconscious. This forensic observation perfectly and powerfully corroborated Vicky Mordecai's earlier testimony about Gail being incapacitated with a rag soaked with something over her mouth and nose. The physical evidence, meticulously interpreted by a leading expert, aligned with astounding precision with the informant's account, creating an undeniable narrative of premeditated murder. The conclusion articulated by Dr. Biden was unequivocal, forceful, and deeply resonant, echoing the powerful, intuitive instincts of the experienced police officer who had first questioned the suicide narrative. At the scene, Dr. Biden said, "This is not suicide. This is not an accident. This is a homicide." His authoritative declaration, backed by an unparalleled understanding of forensic science, anatomy, and human physiology, provided the definitive medical and scientific proof the prosecution desperately needed to move forward. He made the same statement I did. You can't commit suicide in shallow water. This expert testimony, rooted in unassailable scientific principles and decades of professional experience, was a decisive and irrefutable blow against the county coroner's persistent, ego-driven ruling. Despite Dr. Biden's unassailable findings and the clarity of his expert opinion, the local coroner remained astonishingly steadfast in his initial position, an illustration of professional stubbornness that verged on the absurd. It didn't change the coroner's mind. He took the position that it was still a suicide and continued. To do that, the coroner's refusal to concede, even in the face of overwhelming and authoritative expert medical evidence, highlighted a troubling adherence to his initial judgment, perhaps driven by deeply ingrained professional pride or an unwillingness to acknowledge a significant error in a high-profile case. He took the position that he was a coroner and that was the gospel, and there was no getting around it. This bureaucratic intransigence, frustrating and frankly obstructive, risked undermining justice. Yet, the investigators held firm to their moral compass. To me, the victim was way more important than his ego. The prosecution now possessed the irrefutable scientific evidence they required, and their hope rested firmly on Dr. Biden's expert opinion being potent enough to sway a jury, despite the local coroner's continuing and increasingly isolated dissent. The truth, meticulously uncovered, was finally ready for its day in court. The long road to justice, trials, pleas, and revelation. On October 10, 1994, nearly 2.5 agonizing years after Gail Mosby was found dead in her bathtub, the wheels of justice finally turned. The joint trial of Deborah Mosby, Richard Mosby, and Billy Ray Ford began, a culmination of tireless investigative work and unwavering determination. The prosecution, spearheaded by Tommy and his dedicated legal team, adopted a strategic approach to the complex case. Tommy and I decided that we would try the conspiracy to commit capital murder first. This strategic choice allowed them to meticulously lay out the intricate network of planning and intent that underscored the plot, establishing the broad canvas of the crime before prosecuting the ultimate act of murder. As the state systematically presented its formidable body of evidence for the conspiracy, charges, phone records, informant testimony, and the powerful forensic reconstruction, the pressure on the defendants became immense. Under the weight of the accumulating facts, one of the accused, facing the bleak prospect of severe consequences, decided to turn against the others. It's not looking good to Billy Ray. The confessed hitman Billy Ray Ford, recognizing the precariousness of his position and the overwhelming nature of the evidence against him, sought an avenue for a more lenient outcome. So his lawyer comes over to the counsel table and says, "My client wants a deal, and he will agree to testify against Richard and Debbie, which is golden." This was a decisive breakthrough prosecutors had painstakingly worked towards, an insider, a direct participant in the murder, willing to expose the full, unvarnished truth of conspiracy. Such a confession is the holy grail of prosecutorial efforts, an unparalleled opportunity to dismantle the defense's narrative. Ford's statement, delivered from the witness stand, served as the ultimate unmasking, definitively settling the question of who truly masterminded Gail's murder. His testimony left no room for doubt about the hierarchy of malevolence. He actually dealt with Deborah, who retained him, and she was the one he was talking to. This directly implicated Deborah Mosby as the primary orchestrator, the insidious force who initiated the contact, conceived the plot, and directed its execution. Richard, Gail's ex-husband, was depicted not as the instigator, but as a deeply complicit, yet seemingly subservient figure, operating under Deborah's dominant and manipulative influence. Richard apparently pretty much did what Deborah told him to do. This testimony, coming from a direct participant, was a critical turning point, solidifying the prosecution's case and clarifying distinct roles within the sinister conspiracy. With Billy Ray Ford now firmly on board as a state's witness, agreeing to testify against Deborah and Richard Mosby. The couple's cases were strategically severed. They would now face separate trials for capital murder, a prosecutorial move that allowed for a more focused and targeted presentation of evidence against each defendant's specific role and culpability. In May 1995, the proceedings against Richard Mosby commenced, faced with the overwhelming body of evidence, including the chilling testimony of the man he himself had ushered into Gail's home to commit murder. Richard made a momentous and legally significant decision. Richard decided to plead guilty to murder. This plea of guilt meant that the death penalty, a potential legal consequence for capital murder in Mississippi, was explicitly taken off the table. So, of course, the death penalty was off the table at that point. For Gail's children, this moment was an emotional maelstrom, a complex interplay of profound anguish and an unexpected sense of relief. It was a confusing time emotionally because, as hateful and as angry as I was, the sense of relief was just overbearing. The crushing reality of their father's guilt, the definitive acknowledgement of his unforgivable role in their mother's death, brought a measure of painful closure. It was very important to know that he pleaded guilty. His admission, though agonizing, brought a clear, albeit tragic, answer to a haunting question that had plagued their lives for years. With Richard's guilty plea secured, prosecutors then turned their full, laser-like attention to the woman they believed was the true architect of the crime, the malevolent force driving the entire horrific plot. The mastermind is Deborah Mosby, and we know her to be, however you define it, evil. This star characterization, evil while strong, reflected the profound depth of her calculated cruelty, her manipulation, and her relentless, almost obsessive animosity towards Gail. Debbie was the catalyst of this whole thing. Her actions were not impulsive. They were meticulously planned, deeply vindictive, and devoid of remorse. Deborah's trial began in December 1995, more than 3 grueling years after Gail's life was brutally extinguished. The prosecution's case was built on an unassailable foundation of compelling evidence, buttressed by star witnesses whose credibility and expertise were unimpeachable. Billy Ray Ford, the confessed hitman, provided the chilling, step-by-step insider account of the plot's execution. And Dr. Michael Biden, the nationally acclaimed forensic pathologist, presented the irrefutable scientific proof that unequivocally transformed Gail's death from a suspected suicide into a clear, calculated homicide. You can't discredit Dr. Biden. You can't do it. He's too good. His expert testimony was unwavering, scientifically sound, and meticulously presented, providing the definitive, unchallengeable explanation of precisely how Gail had been murdered. He put the case together for us. His forensic brilliance was the undeniable truth-teller, silencing all doubt. Throughout her trial, Deborah Mosby maintained her stoic silence, strategically refusing to take the stand in her own defense. This is a common legal tactic, as a defendant cannot be compelled to incriminate themselves. However, it also left state prosecutors free to speculate on the deep-seated motives that drove her to orchestrate such a brutal act, presenting them to the jury as the logical underpinnings of her malevolence. While her palpable animosity towards Gail was clearly evident and served as a powerful emotional motive, the financial aspect was also a strong and tangible driver. If Gail died, then child support would stop, and that Social Security would start for the boys, which I believe at that time was going to be $1,300 a month. This financial gain, coupled with venomous hatred and a controlling desire to eradicate Gail from Richard's life, presented a potent, if chillingly mercenary, motive. My impression was that she just didn't like Gail Mosby. In fact, I think she hated her, and she just decided that her life would be better without her, and it was worth having her killed. The prosecution argued, powerfully and convincingly, that Deborah's actions were a fusion of cold, calculating financial opportunism and pure, unadulterated malice. a profound and twisted desire to eliminate an inconvenience and a perceived rival, ultimately leading her to contract the killing of Gale. The jury, having meticulously listened to all the evidence and testimony, deliberated carefully and ultimately found Deborah Mosby guilty on all charges. However, in the subsequent penalty phase, they became irrevocably deadlocked on recommending the death penalty. Consequently, the presiding judge instead sentenced her to a life term in prison. For Gale's family, particularly her children, the conviction and sentencing of Deborah, the perceived mastermind, brought a powerful and long-awaited sense of resolution, of justice finally served. It was the final nail in the coffin in the sense of, wow, she's where she belongs. She's in prison, and now she can't hurt anybody else. The triumph of justice, achieved through immense dedication and relentless pursuit of truth, provided a profound affirmation that even the most cunning and insidious evil would, eventually, face an unwavering reckoning. It was a testament to the unwavering efforts of those who refused to let Gale Mosby's story end as a mere statistic. The aftermath, the enduring legacy of love and indomitable resilience. The years that followed the convictions, though bringing a measure of justice and opportunity for healing, also delivered their own unique challenges and renewed heartaches for Gale Mosby's family. The grim realities of the American penal system, where life in prison can sometimes be a fluid concept, would prove to be another difficult lesson. In 2007, both Billy Ray Ford, the confessed hitman, and Richard Mosby, Gale's ex-husband, were released from prison, having served their respective sentences. Then, in 2021, more than 2 decades after Gale's murder, Deborah Mosby herself was also released after serving 26 years of her life sentence. For Gale's children, who had lived with the trauma and fought so hard for justice, this reality was a profound and deeply painful disappointment, a harsh reminder that the phrase life in jail does not always equate to a sentence served for the duration of one's natural life. One thing I learned from Debbie's conviction and from my dad's sentencing is that life in jail doesn't mean life in jail. The news of their release, particularly Deborah's, was a significant emotional blow, a huge gut punch. For those who had carried the burden of their grief and the memory of Gale's violent death for so long, it's a huge gut punch knowing that they're out of prison. Despite the anger, the frustration, and the reawakened pain, the enduring and luminous legacy of Gale Mosby, meticulously preserved and passionately reinforced by the unwavering love and steadfast guidance of her parents, provided her sons with an inner strength that transcended bitterness and resentment. But I'll say this based on how my grandparents raised us. It's made the anger that we had towards them. It's made it small because what we have, it's way more important. The focus, through their grandparents' wisdom and nurturing, shifted powerfully and deliberately from the darkness of their parents' abhorrent actions to the enduring light of the family that remained. This profound act of emotional redirection was a testament to their inherent resilience and the transformative power of a truly loving upbringing. It demonstrated an ability to rise above victimhood, to choose meaning over malice. The profound bond that flourished between the brothers Bill and Joseph, forged in the crucible of shared tragedy and nurtured tirelessly by their devoted grandparents, became a living, breathing testament to their mother's most cherished values. What keeps my mom alive to me today is a relationship that I have with my brother, because she really instilled in us a sense of family, and we never let that go. Gale's fundamental lessons of familial love, unwavering support, and indomitable perseverance continued to resonate deeply, profoundly shaping the resilient, compassionate men her sons ultimately became. Joseph, with an enduring and heartfelt commitment, carries her memory forward, ensuring her spirit lives on vibrantly in the next generation. I like to remind my own boys that I was a product of one of the greatest mothers this world could have ever had. So I want them to be able to understand that even though she's not around, she's still all with them. This powerful generational legacy ensures that Gail Mosby's life continues to touch and inspire, a beacon of unconditional love that shines brightly beyond the shadow of murder. The profoundly disturbing narrative of Gail Mosby's murder serves as a chilling and unforgettable reminder of the insidious and corrosive nature of human malice, and how seemingly mundane domestic conflicts, fueled by resentment and control, can spiral catastrophically into cold-blooded murder. It lays bare the unsettling reality of individuals like Deborah Mosby, whose toxic blend of unbridled resentment, absolute control, and a shocking lack of empathy can ultimately culminate in the most extreme acts of violence. Her casual and chilling belief that life would simply be better without her, so starkly articulated, stands as a chilling testament to a mind profoundly devoid of human compassion, willing to extinguish another life for mere convenience and perceived personal gain. The subtle satire here points not at the tragedy itself, but at the astonishing, almost comically petty and self-centered mindset of such a criminal, viewing another human being's existence as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to her carefully constructed, egocentric universe. This poignant case also stands as a powerful and enduring tribute to the tireless, often unheralded, efforts of law enforcement officers and legal professionals who steadfastly refuse to accept an easy or convenient answer, the profound, old police gut feeling, the meticulous attention to a minute yet critical detail, like a cracked picture frame, the unwavering conviction and professional courage demonstrated in the face of an obstinate authority figure, and the brilliant, transformative forensic work of experts like Dr. Michael Biden, all synergistically converge to peel back the intricate layers of deception and expose the brutal truth. It eloquently demonstrates that justice, though sometimes agonizingly delayed and fraught with formidable challenges, can ultimately prevail, driven by the resolute dedication and moral fortitude of those who courageously choose to speak for the voiceless victims. Ultimately, Gail Mosby's story is a profound humanistic lesson, etched indelibly into the annals of criminal psychology and investigative triumph. It underscores the critical importance of being vigilant and attentive to the quiet, often overlooked, alarms that sound in the margins of everyday life, the friend's unsettling premonition, the child's intuitive and insistent disbelief, the experienced officer's subtle yet persistent professional instinct. It is a compelling narrative of good, resiliently and ultimately triumphing over evil, not through some explosive or sensationalized cinematic confrontation, but through the slow, deliberate, often frustrating, yet ultimately effective grind of meticulous detective work, robust legal process, and an unwavering commitment to truth. This story serves as an invaluable educational beacon, urging us all to recognize the subtle yet potent signs of manipulative, controlling personalities, to extend unwavering support to victims entangled in domestic conflicts, and, most profoundly, to never underestimate the enduring power of familial love and the relentless, often arduous, pursuit of profound, restorative justice. Gail Mosby's spirit, defined by her unwavering devotion to her family and her compassionate heart, lives on, a vivid and inspiring testament to a life exceptionally well-lived and a powerful legacy of love, that even the darkest and most calculated evil could not ultimately diminish or extinguish. The profound lessons from her life and death resonate, guiding us all towards greater empathy, sharper discernment, and a renewed faith in a capacity for justice. The deceptive tranquility of Sunday afternoon, May 24th, 1992, in Jackson, Mississippi, veiled a horror about to be unveiled. A simple family arrangement, the return of two young boys to their mother's care, would unexpectedly plunge into a labyrinthine narrative of death, deceit, and a chilling vendetta. What first appeared as a personal tragedy, an apparent suicide shrouded in melancholic silence, was, in fact, the calculated execution of a life, carefully masked by those who orchestrated it. As a criminal psychology analyst and detective novelist, I find such cases particularly compelling. They lay bare the intricate workings of the human mind, both in its capacity for profound evil and its equally remarkable ability to relentlessly pursue truth. The unanswered door, a mother's absence and a child's intuition. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Richard Mosby, accompanied by his new wife, Deborah, made their way to the home of his ex-wife, Gail Mosby. Their two sons, 7-year-old Joseph and 9-year-old Bill, had spent the weekend under their care, a common arrangement following the parents' divorce. The established routine dictated their return to their mother precisely at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Yet, as they approached the familiar dwelling, a subtle tremor of unease began to ripple through the seemingly normal Sunday. Joseph, still processing the world through the unclouded lens of childhood innocence, recounted the unsettling start to what should have been a joyful reunion with his mother. We knocked on the door, and my mom didn't answer. This was immediately unusual, a deviation from Gail's predictable nature. Further disquiet manifested in an unexpected physical barrier. Doors locked and it never locked. This small detail, seemingly inconsequential to a child, immediately registered as an anomaly. Gail was a creature habit, and her home, a haven of security, typically remained accessible. Joseph's young mind struggled to reconcile these conflicting realities. I was trying to figure out what's going on, because my mom's car's right there. The presence of her vehicle, a tangible indicator of her proximity, only deepened the perplexing mystery. I'm so young, I'm not thinking any things. You don't go there when you're that age. His undeveloped understanding of the world's darker corners shielded him momentarily from the true implications. However, the more intuitive Bill, with his additional 2 years of life experience, sensed a deeper, more ominous undercurrent. But I got the sense that Bill understood something was wrong. The unspoken anxieties of an older child, grappling with nascent fears, often speak volumes more than words. Richard's wife, Deborah, perhaps attempting to maintain an air of normalcy or oblivious to the gathering storm, scribbled a note and left it on Gail's car, a conventional message of their visit. Before departing, they made a casual request to the next-door neighbor, a man attuned to the gentle rhythms of their quiet street, to call if Gail made contact. However, as the clock ticked past 6 o'clock, the neighbor's initial compliance transformed into genuine concern. He knew Gail Mosby. He understood her commitment, her steadfast reliability. The neighbor was concerned because Gail was very responsible. There was some reason why she would not be there. His conviction was not based on idle speculation. It was rooted in years of observing Gail's impeccable character, a profound sense of unease, a premonition that transcended mere worry, prompted him to act. Equipped with a spare key, a symbol of the trust and camaraderie characteristic of that neighborhood, he unlocked Gail's front door and stepped into the stillness of her home, his heart likely pounding with a mixture of apprehension and hope. The interior of the house initially presented a deceptive tableau of peace and order. Everything seemed orderly in the house, which was consistent with the way she did things. She was apparently a neat housekeeper, but everything appeared to be in order. This detail, later dissected by investigative minds, would eventually be reinterpreted not as evidence of serene domesticity, but as a chilling signature of control, a carefully constructed illusion. Yet, this fragile facade of normalcy was about to shatter, revealing the brutal truth beneath. The neighbor's anxious search led him inevitably to the main bathroom, where the illusion disintegrated into an unspeakable scene. He was horrified to find that she was in her bathtub, and Gail Mosby was dead. The stark reality of the discovery painted a grim, chilling picture. She was unclothed. Her body was in the bathtub, with her feet hanging outside the bathtub. Her head was still underwater. The scene on its surface spoke of drowning, a death both tragic and profoundly solitary. She died from drowning. The initial, superficial assessment left little room for other interpretations, steering minds toward a singular, sorrowful conclusion. There was no other explanation for it. In the immediate, emotionally charged moments following the discovery, such an initial assessment is common, a human attempt to categorize and comprehend the incomprehensible. However, it is precisely in these initial moments that the seeds of doubt are sometimes sown, particularly for those with trained eyes and an innate understanding of human suffering. Gail's distraught neighbor, reeling from the traumatic sight, immediately dialed 911, initiating the official cascade of emergency services, police, paramedics, and the grim machinery of criminal investigation. First impressions, the allure of simplicity versus the whispered doubt. The arrival of police and paramedics on the scene minutes later introduced a structured, albeit somber, assessment to the unfolding tragedy. As a standard procedure, law enforcement began by scrutinizing the immediate environment, searching for any telltale signs that might contradict the apparent simplicity of the drowning. When the police arrived, they noticed no sign of a struggle. They didn't see anything being disturbed. The absence of overturned furniture, scuffled rugs, or forced entry lent considerable weight to the preliminary assumption of a self-inflicted death. Adding to this impression, investigators discovered Gail's clothing meticulously arranged. They found her clothes had been folded and left by the bathtub. Such a detail often corresponds with individuals who prepare for their final act, adding a grim sense of personal control to their end. Further corroboration appeared in the form of Gail's private journal. They also found a journal. Its pages revealed a personal struggle, a window into a mind grappling with inner turmoil. She had been having some problems with depression. The raw vulnerability expressed within its entries provided potential, if heartbreaking, motive for an individual contemplating ending their own life. This psychological evidence was augmented by tangible indicators of medical treatment. Also, they did find some prescriptions. I can't specifically recall what they were, but the kinds of things you would expect somebody who had been depressed to have been prescribed. The presence of prescribed antidepressants or anxiolytics. Medications indicative of a diagnosed and treated depressive condition further reinforce the developing narrative. You put that package together, that kind of tips you over towards suicide. From a superficial or even clinically detached perspective, the pieces seem to fit, align and form a cohesive, albeit tragic, picture of a life voluntarily ended. However, a fundamental principle of criminal investigation mandates a thorough and unbiased evaluation before any definitive conclusion. Even as the tide of initial opinion swayed towards suicide, the seasoned professionals on scene were bound to probe deeper, to challenge every assumption. It was during this critical phase that the fragile consensus began to splinter, revealing a profound dissonance thanks to the discerning observations of an experienced officer. That evening, I was just on active patrol, and I got the call of a deceased subject at that location. The officer, approaching the scene with professional detachment, cataloged the absence of overt indicators of foul play, aligning with the general impression. There was no signs of any disturbance, any foul play. Yet, certain seemingly minor details registered as anomalous, gnawing at his veteran intuition. I did notice that one of her legs had a small bruise on the inside of her left ankle. A bruise, while seemingly insignificant on its own, was out of place in the context of peaceful, self-orchestrated drowning. More disturbing were the direct observations related to the immediate cause of death itself. I could tell there was frothing from the mouth, and there was a small amount of blood in the water, which would indicate the lungs were struggling for air. This was not the placid surrender implied by a self-chosen, deliberate drowning. It was the agonizing evidence of a desperate struggle for breath, a body's primal refusal to succumb. The presence of both froth, often a sign of pulmonary edema during near drowning, and blood, potentially from burst capillaries in the lungs due to extreme strain, spoke to a violent, involuntary battle against submersion. To an experienced officer, a man who had witnessed a grim tableau of death countless times, these seemingly minor discrepancies coalesced into an undeniable contradiction. The most salient detail, the one that screamed defiance to the suicide theory, was the level of water in the bathtub. The thing that got me is the fact that the water was shallow. This observation immediately triggered a deep, innate understanding of human physiology and the powerful, involuntary survival instincts embedded within us all. Your body's not going to let you kill yourself drowning in shallow water. Your body's going to fight. It's not going to let you drown in inches of water. The primal drive to survive, an instinct far more powerful than any conscious will self-destruct, ensures that even in despair, a body will thrash, gasp, and fight against suffocation. To overcome this instinct in shallow water, where escape is physically simple, requires an overwhelming external force or total incapacitation. The collective presence of blood, frothing, and most critically, the shallow water, created a profound and undeniable dissonance with the presented narrative of suicide. The meticulous order of the room, previously supportive of self-harm, now felt deliberately staged, an attempt to hide a truth too ugly for the casual glance. Normally, I probably would not have even called the homicide detectives out, but the fact that there was blood in the water, that there's just inches of water in the tub, I call a homicide. This was not merely a gut feeling. It was a deduction rooted in years of observing the grim realities of violent death, a forensic intuition that recognized the distinct fingerprints of murder disguised as suicide. This experienced officer, challenging the initial wave of opinion and defying the easy answer, drew a clear line in the metaphorical sand. Gail Mosby's death, in a professional estimation, was not a suicide. It was homicide. A family's unwavering conviction, the irreverence of maternal love. In the wake of such a discovery, official pronouncements often shape initial perceptions. However, for those who truly knew Gail Mosby, the suggestion of suicide was met with a visceral and immediate rejection, a profound and unshakable disbelief. Her children, still raw with grief, were unwavering in their conviction. They thought that my mom had committed suicide. I never believed that for a second. Joseph's certainty was absolute, rooted in the very core of his being, undiminished by the official reports. For him, and for his brother, the rationale was simple, profound, and universally understood. The unyielding power of a mother's love. My mom valued family the most in life. This was not a passing sentiment for Gail. It was the unwavering compass that guided her existence, the animating force behind her every decision and action. Everything she did in her life was take care of her children. From a perspective of criminal psychology, understanding a victim's core motivations is paramount. A truly suicidal individual, even one deeply depressed, often feels an overwhelming sense of burden, of being an obstacle to the happiness of their loved ones. However, Gail's children consistently attested to her boundless, self-sacrificing love. Her entire life was a testament to their well-being and success. The idea of her voluntarily abandoning them, particularly at such tender ages, was not merely improbable. It was an act utterly irreconcilable with her fundamental character. I knew something happened to her. This sentiment, echoed by her family and closest friends, served as an internal bulwark against the official narrative, an intuitive truth that no amount of circumstantial evidence could dismantle. Their profound grief was now compounded by a gnawing suspicion that Gail's passing was not an act of despair, but an act of malevolent design. The tapestry of a life, Gail Petkovzak, architect of love and success. To truly grasp the fervent rejection of the suicide theory by Gail's loved ones, one must delve into the rich and vibrant tapestry of her life, understanding the woman she was and the values that defined her. Gail Petkovzak was born on September 13, 1952, amidst the historic charm of Natchez, Mississippi. She was the eldest of 3 daughters, raised in the structured yet loving embrace of a devoutly Catholic home, a foundation that instilled discipline, faith, and a strong sense of community. My grandparents, Frank and Jackie, had 3 daughters, Gail, Lisa, and Jackie. Gail was the eldest. My mom is Lisa. She was the middle child, and then Jackie was the baby. This close-knit family environment, anchored by her dedicated grandparents, instilled within Gail a profound appreciation for effort and integrity. They were a loving household. My grandparents understood that you had to work hard to be able to appreciate the fun things in life. This lesson, imparted early and often, shaped Gail's approach to both her studies